Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. Those of you that do, thank you very much. So, I went back in time and I have the first, it's not the first game they played, I'm sure, because they played on chess.com before, but as far as like an official tournament or over the board, this is their first meeting officially. So this is from 2017 and it's the Pro Chess League. You guys know they play that every year on chess.com. So this is Eric Hansen versus Wesley So. And for all my people in the Philippines, of course, mabuhay to you. Kumusta na aking makaibigan? Maraming salamat po sa nanonood ng aking mga video. Hello, you lit. Magandang po, magandang araw. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. As always, we're going to see who is malakas in this one. So, yeah, I said all of that. Okay, we're good to go. If you guys are ready to go, without any further ado, as the Gad Matter says, let's roll, see what we have for the game. So we got e4, e6. Now, of course, you guys know, after you play e4, you have many different options. I mean, there's like 20 logical options. I mean, I won't say logical. I'll probably say there's about up to 10 logical options. And then you start getting kind of crazy for the rest of the 10. But everything is fairly competitive. I mean, you normally are going to see probably more than half of the time you're going to see either a French, possibly Scandinavian, you'll see Sicilians, like absolutely. So Carol Cons and, just like typical, like open, getting into like a Roy Lopez possible situation and stuff. But we do have E6, which is the French defense in this game. We got D4, D5. Almost every single time you play the French, it's going to go in this fashion. And this is kind of a breaking point. There are many different ways that you can play in this position. We do see knight to c3 by Hansen, and then we see bishop to b4. And bishop to b4 is just a very simple intention. I mean, you're wanting to remove the defender of this square so you can just basically win a pawn. And, of course, white is not usually going to allow that to happen. So there's many different ways that they do it. Hansen in this game decides he wants to just push the pawn. So this is called the French defense Winawer advanced variation. So that's just, like I said, it's just a way to take care of the pawn. You also have like, pawn takes here. You have a few different ways. I mean, even in rare lines, I mean, F3 is playable. Not that it's that great, but I mean, I'm sure it's been tried. A lot of the times, when you do get in this position, there are a lot of people who they want to avoid, going into these lines. They don't like this bishop being pinned or this knight being pinned down with the bishop. So what they actually do in this position is actually go the Tarrasch. So this is just the French defense Tarrasch variation. And if you're black, you can transpose it into a Rubinstein with knight takes. But, this just gives you the chance, of course, if the bishop comes here, you have c3 and you're not damaging your structure. But it's not the end of the world to play the French defense Winawer with the damaged structure. There are a lot of different variations in the French from white where, white plays and they're perfectly fine with a damaged structure. Sometimes you can't really avoid it. But like I said, we did see e5 from this. Knight came to e5. We do have a3. Bishop takes c3, pawn takes c3, and here we have the damaged structure. But this is fairly even for both sides. It's not that it's so much easier to play really for either side, because both sides definitely have some things that they need to work out. So as you guys are familiar with, when you have queen's pawn situations, c5 comes. This is the most logical way to try to break down and cause further damage to white's pawn structure. And of course, you guys know that f6 is definitely something that comes as well. We do have h4. So Hansen says, man, I'm going to go ahead and just attack the crap out of you. Let me see if I can push my pawn here and push my pawn here and force you to play g6. So we do see queen to c7. We got h5. And then you really kind of have to do something about this pawn because it is, fairly annoying. So we do see h6. And so, this pawn is actually kind of freezing these two pawns right here. But it's not an endgame, so it doesn't have as much of weight behind it. We do see knight to f3. We got b6. And we see bishop to b5 with check, because why not check? Bishop blocks on d7. We see bishop back to d3. And then we see bishop to a4, which bishop to a4 is the strongest move in the position. But I'm going to be completely honest with you. I have no idea what it's doing. It doesn't really seem like it's attacking anything, because even if you like take care, I mean, you're double protected on this square. So like I said, I mean, even though it is the top move, or it's one of the good moves and stuff, I'm not even sure honestly what it's doing. I'm at a loss, like, you know. So your guess is as good as mine on that one. But bishop comes to d2. We see knight over to d7. We have castles by white. And then we do see the novelty of the game, which is a6. You know, another move that, I mean, it's kind of just seems like a6 is either something to prepare b5, or, you know, it's just preventing like a knight jumping here or bishop jumping here. So, you know, it kind of doesn't seem like it needs to really be played either. I don't know. These guys are thinking differently than me. We do see rook to e1. The bishop comes up to b5. Bishop takes b5, pawn takes b5, and we do have queen to e2. And then we do see castles by black. And the position is fairly equal in this situation, even though white goes ahead and snaps a pawn off the board with queen takes b5. The thing about that pawn on b5 is it was actually really horrible for black. It wasn't really doing anything. It was just literally a target. So it was pretty much going to be lost at any point anyway. But one of the great things that happens for black in this situation is they do have a half open A file that they're definitely going to be taking full advantage of. And they start doing that immediately. And so we see rook down to a5. And this is inconveniencing the queen a little bit. So the queen comes back to e2. We see rook to a4. You know, we are just basically just completely stopping this pawn. So this does actually get a little bit annoying. You're going to start kind of ganging up on that pawn, you know, and so you're going to be, you know, you're going to be getting the pawn back as black, right? So we have actually reached a point in the game. There's something I'm going to explain. I'm going to actually back up and explain. But we have reached a position. Actually, I'll do the explaining first, now that I thought about it. Okay, so after we see castles here, this is something I actually forgot to do. Okay, so like I said, it does look fairly even. You know, and so you're just trying to look and see, like, okay, what are the differences between, you know, the positions and stuff like that. This is actually slightly favorable for black, even though white is about to go and take this pawn here, right? But like I said, I mean, you have a lot of play on this A file. This rook is going to be swinging over. And as crazy as it might sound, black's minor pieces are actually a little bit better than white's minor pieces. And that's kind of like, you know, one of the things with this that give them the slight edge. Because at some point, this knight is going to be plopping down to f5. f6 is going to be played, kind of breaking down your structure. If you can strap white with these super ugly double pawns, then I mean, you're just going to be doing really great. So that's definitely, you know, like I said, I mean, this knight is going to be getting a little bit better. And if you look at the position, you are in somewhat of a locked situation. So this bishop doesn't really have, you know, some great scope. It doesn't have anywhere to go this way. It doesn't, I mean, it just has these two squares. It can't go here. I mean, the queen isn't in a position where you can kind of try to sack on h6. So, you know, it's definitely black is preferred as far as their minor pieces are concerned, just the advantages. But like I said, we did see rook down to a1 in that position. And if you want to go ahead and pause the video right now and guess what move white actually plays, it's actually like probably the best move in the position. Has a really nice idea behind it. So like I said, if you want to go ahead and pause the video and see what white plays here, go ahead and do so. Okay, cool. So if you were like paying attention to what I just said, I meant to say it a slightly earlier, but like I said, one of the ways that black can try to maximize their position is by, you know, of course, swinging the rook over to a8, you know, rook f to a8, but also playing this knight down into f5 and just basically plopping on a good square that it's a little bit hard for black, for white to try to like really do a lot about. And so, Eric Hansen, realizing this, he goes ahead and plays g4. So if you found g4, congratulations. Like, you're not even letting the knight even get into f5. So you are basically taking away one of the things that black can try to do to maximize their position. So, you know, very sharp mind. Okay, so we do see rook f to a8. And then we see bishop down to c1. You can defend the position, but you guys are going to be seeing that white is basically having to use all of their pieces and put them on really weird squares. just to try to defend all of their weaknesses in their position. And you basically just see Wesley so picking at, Eric Hansen's position like at all times. And it's kind of annoying. Pawn takes d4, pawn takes d4. You see rook to c4. Now you have a double attack on this pawn. So pretty much rook to a2 is like the only way you can defend against that. You do see knight to c6. And you are now double attacking this pawn. But the problem is there really isn't a great way. Some of you guys might be sitting there thinking, okay, I mean, maybe I can go bishop to e3. Maybe I can go bishop to b2. Like, it feels like I can defend against it, right? But the problem is your undefended rook on a2. So let's say, for example, like, okay, in the game we saw c3. And it just looks kind of weird. You're like, man, that just gives away a pawn for no reason. Yes, but like I said, that is the best move in the position. If you go bishop to b2, you're looking at knight to b4, and you have just now like discovered a double attack on this, a triple attack actually on this pawn. And you do have this pawn pinned to this rook, but you're also attacking the rook. So this created so many problems for you. And if we back up, if we actually go bishop to e3, it's more of the same because this rook is still undefended. So you would be looking at knight to b4. And now you have just discovered a triple attack on this pawn, and you can't defend that. So it's a very, very annoying position to be in. So c3 is the best move. So this is what Eric Hansen found. But you pretty much have to give away the pawn so that you can get an attack on the rook before they have a chance to do a discover attack on you. So rook comes back to c4 after bishop to b2. Rook a comes to a1. Anticipating that knight to b4 is going to be coming. You see knight to a5. Queen comes up to d3. You see rook over to c8. And you now see that, I mean, black has basically just completely taken control of this c-file. So they're not trying to give white anything. Rook A comes to c1 because, you're looking at if rook takes back and, then you have an attack against the queen. So the queen steps back up to d8. We see king to g2. We got b5. And this is just mean, man. You're looking like, okay, if I take here, the pawn is going to take, and I'm just going to just shift my attention over to the b file. Like, it's pretty nasty, man. Rook comes over to b1. You see knight back to c6. And you see that the knight has just come back in conjunction with this rook to add some more attackers on this d4 point, because that is the base of the pawn chain in the center for white. So bishop comes down to c1. We see b4. Queen comes down to d2, and then we have queen to b6, which, like I said, I mean, this knight, this rook, and this queen are all focused on this pawn. Now, if we actually back up, after we saw queen to d2, there was actually a very monstrous move in the position, and that was actually f6. It's pretty much doing roughly the same thing of attacking this pawn, but it's just doing it in a slightly different way. But then it's adding pressure onto this f file. So after f6, we would see pawn takes f6, and then queen takes f6. And then after pawn takes b4, rook goes to f8, and you can see the pressure is crazy on this file. It's just nasty. I mean, the queen can back up, knight can come down and plop into to e4. So there's all types of improvements that can be made in the position. But like I said, we did see queen to b6. Rook comes to d1. We see f6. Pawn takes f6, knight takes f6. We got queen over to e2. Knight comes down to e4 because, that is a dream square. This knight cannot be contested by this bishop because it is an opposite color bishop. It's a dark square bishop, and this is a light square. So you definitely, when you're playing your games, like, be thinking about where can you put a knight that is on a square where a bishop can't influence it. And, the player's going to have to really be thinking about sacrificing a rook for your beautiful knight. Pawn takes b4. We see e5. e5 actually does a lot in the position because, definitely on Wesley So's mind, he is thinking about either, bringing his queen over to f6 or e6 at some point. And you'll see that'll be relevant in a second. b5 comes. We see knight takes d4, knight takes d4, pawn takes d4. Queen comes up to d3. And then we have queen to f6. And, you can see it's really heating up. You have a lot of open files. And it's crazy because you have a bishop for white. But, I mean, the pieces are kind of clumped up, and it's really kind of hard to defend this position ultimately. Queen comes to f3. You're trying to block the threat on f2. Queen takes f3. King takes f3, and then you do have a rook to f8, and it is in this position that Eric Hansen does resign the game. And it's basically because there's really only 3 moves that you can make in this position. And they all just horribly fail. And there really isn't much else that you can do about the situation. So let's just take the most obvious moves, for example. Let's look at King G2, King E2. King to G2, you know, obviously just allows Rook to F2 with check. After the king comes down to G1, you see Rook C to C2. And, I mean, what do you do? I mean, there's just really no defense of this position. I mean, these rooks are disconnected from each other. This bishop is, I mean, not really going anywhere. And, I mean, you're looking at all these checks about to be coming up. And, I mean, this knight is protecting this rook. So, it's just bad, man. So, after rook to F8, if we were actually to go king to E2, it would be more of the same. Rook takes F2, king comes down to E1. You're in even more of a box here. So, this is just dire. And after rook to F8 with check, the only other thing you can do is block with the bishop. But unfortunately, rook to C3 with check is going to knock you away from the bishop. After you step to literally anywhere, the rook is going to be taken, and now you've just lost an entire piece. So, as you guys can see, in light of all of those situations, Eric Hansen went ahead and just resigned the game, and there just isn't much else that you can do. So, you know, that was a pretty interesting, like, up and down game. And yeah, so it was nice. I liked it personally. Definitely both sides had some chances. It's just one of those things where, you know, the French defense is something that's very hard to play against as white. And definitely consider playing the French defense if you play against E4 as black. I do it personally, and I like the French. You know, it definitely causes some problems. You can definitely have a lot of players that are more, you know, that are more capable of playing open positions. And then when you play the French against them, you know, they kind of dread it because you're going to be getting into closed positions. So, yeah, you know, spring it, you know, see if it's something that you like playing. But anyways, I appreciate you guys very much. Maraming salamat, aking makaibigan. Makiro tayo mamaya, paalam. And I'll see you guys next time.